libertarian podcast. I'm going to throw my own spin on it. Um, I'm flying solo today. Andy has been swamped with work for the last couple weeks, and hopefully he'll be joining us again on this coming weekend, which would be a podcast for next week. So, considering that this is my first time hosting a solo podcast, I thought it would be kind of an easy transition to do a reaction video. So we've done a video or a reaction video for Sorel before. This one is about CBDC. She does a great job at introducing topics like this in a simple and easy to digest format. And so I encourage anybody to subscribe to her channel. She's really amazing, easy on the eyes, and also very good at putting things that are complicated into layman's terms. So I'm going to get right into the video, and I'll stop intermittently and discuss some of the topics that she raises and concerns. So here we go.
Imagine a world where you can't buy anything without permission, where every daily choice you make is monitored and logged into a database controlled by the leaders of your nation. A world where you could be forced to buy the things your government wants, or blocked from purchasing the things it doesn't. A world where your money may no longer be a tool of personal freedom, and instead one that could be used to control your every decision, action, and move. Well, that world may be closer than you think. In fact, in many ways, it's already here. Welcome to our 100th video, and to mark this milestone, we're covering something that could be the most impactful change in the way that money operates in human history. And without being too dramatic, this will change our lives forever. Now, this is the central bank digital currency, otherwise known as CBDCs, and it's going everywhere, to the UK, US, Australia, Canada, and everywhere in between. Yes, we've covered this topic before. However, there has been so much change in the world of CBDCs that we thought it was important to bring this information to you again and get you up to speed. Now, if what you hear in this video does make you a little worried, it is important to share it. So whether that's a simple like or sharing it with others, it's going to be very, very helpful. So let's get into things and let's talk about how together we may be able to stop this from happening. This is Sigrid.
I am going to jump in real quick here. She does kind of talk about stopping this from happening, and you know, this might be black pill to me, but I don't think that's possible. I think the train has left the station when it comes to central bank digital currencies, and it's going to be something that we're going to have to find a way to live with and somehow operate outside of. So I know a lot of my fellow libertarians will be like, all right, Bitcoin's going to be the answer. The problem is Bitcoin is the foundation to central bank digital currencies, which is kind of ironic because it's, it was kind of proposed as the solution, or kind of the way out against fiat money, and ironically enough, it is being used as the foundation to create a central bank digital currency on blockchain. And blockchain's great in some regards because it's transparent and it's a digital ledger. On the downside, everything you do on the blockchain is recordable. It is programmable, and it is what central banks are going to be using, if not already using in some cases like China, to control monetary policy at the individual level. And I know that, you've probably heard about this topic on other podcasts, and, there a lot of podcasters maybe be like, we need to resist and try to push back. Unfortunately, I think, at least in the United States and probably in a lot of countries around the world, again, we're past the point of no return. There are going to be multiple ways that digital currency CBDCs are introduced and reasons for that. Controlling inflation, I'm sure, could be an excuse. Preventing fraud and manipulation. I mean, there's the government, and I think we can all agree the government uses fear as a means of control. And that's what they're going to do with this and introducing CBDC, at least into the United States, where unfortunately it's going to be cheered on by the majority and applauded by the majority. And this is the death of the American dream, or the foundations, or the founders, or why and how America was founded. Unfortunately, I don't think that our founders, and again, you can't fault them because it was a completely different age, they did not tie down money enough. They really thought that voting and the voice of the states and the people were going to be enough to tie down the federal government, and that's clearly been shown to not be the case. So this is going to be kind of the dark age of freedom, because if you don't own the the production of your wealth, or the wealth is the kind of the production of the whatever job you do, if you don't own the benefit of that job, such as like I mean, typically we call it the American dollar. We're paid in that monetary system, and then that is ours to spend. Yes, there is going to be some debate on really how much is that ours, considering how corrupt and distorted fractional reserve banking is and has been for years. But this is going to be the next step, where the currency that you earn will be 100% controlled by the government. And we'll continue on the video, but again, I'm very black pilled on this, in the fact that I think it's inevitable. I think what we need to focus on is how do we circumvent it. And I'm sure I'll interject on my thoughts moving forward in a little bit.
Kaag, the current finance minister of the Netherlands. On the 26th of October, her party submitted a new set of laws to Dutch Parliament, a bill that she says has been designed to stop illegal money laundering, but that many argue also infringes on personal privacy. The laws would require that all banks in the country be forced to track and keep records of any transactions above 100 euros, a limit that right now is set at 10,000 euros or more. This would give the Dutch government access to an incredible amount of personal data on its citizens, data it would be able to access at any time without any kind of warrant. Across the Atlantic, Joe Biden's government is seeking similar new laws in the US that would drop the bank reporting limit from $10,000 down to just $600. This has drawn criticism and has been called a massive search warrant without a warrant. However, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen brushed aside these concerns, suggesting that Americans have nothing to worry about, saying that the collection of this new data is nothing more than a few pieces of information about individual bank accounts. So
we already know, at least in the United States and most likely around the world, mass surveillance of personal data is already ongoing. So honestly, I think that this move, at least in the U.S., this attempt at lowering that bar to $600 is kind of testing the waters, because they want to see, a lot of times, in something I've learned recently, a lot of times the U.S. government will float an idea out there just to see the amount of pushback they receive. So I think this was floated out there. I don't think this has been decided on, but I think what they're trying to do is just test the waters on what they can get away with. Now, we already know that they're already collecting a massive amount of data on U.S. citizens. And bank records, I'm sure, is, a part of that data. This, however, I think is going to make it a lot easier if this happens, uh, for specifically for the IRS to go after the lower to middle class, especially those who are driving for Uber and Lyft, self-employed people, that they're going to be able to really stomp on them in particular and make sure that every dime they can pull from them will be extracted. So, it's a lot of times I think even the federal income tax was sold originally as a way to tax the rich, and we've seen how that has transpired. So, anytime the government is like, oh, we're going after the rich, or we're just, going after this group of people, they're lying. And it's all about misdirection and testing the water to see the amount of abuse of personal freedoms that they can achieve.
This does raise a few questions. If it's just a few small pieces of information, why does the government want it at all? But anyway, what if the government didn't just have access to your transactions over a certain limit and they had access to everything all the time? Well, this is where CBDCs come in. A central bank digital currency is a new form of digital money. It's like cryptocurrency, but whereas crypto is decentralized and private, CBDCs are exactly the opposite. A CBDC would be completely owned and controlled by your government. They would hold your wallet, your money, and have access to all your financial data, including information on every transaction in your daily life. It would also make banks obsolete, as your account and wallet could be held by your government. Only a couple of years ago, CBDCs were considered hypothetical, but that is no longer the case. Just last week, the Federal Reserve launched a 12-week trial of its own CBDC, a trial supported by financial institutions like MasterCard, Citibank, HSBC, and Wells Fargo. But the US.
So there's a couple different ways that they could introduce this. Either they look at the entire U.S. banking system and they nationalize it. So in that case, every bank that you currently hold an account with would instantly become a direct bank or a direct Federal Reserve bank. So for example, I bank with Lake Michigan Credit Union. There would be a transitional phase. You'd get in the next, in 6 months, that the bank will be rebranded as a local Federal Reserve bank. You would probably see a lot of banks shut down as the Federal Reserve looks at, how many banks are in proximity to how many people, and they would say what makes the most sense. They would probably, again, a lot of these financial institutions are publicly traded, so they would have to buy out the shareholders to nationalize these banks. Or they could simply look at sunsetting the paper dollar and say we're moving to a central bank digital currency that's issued by your private bank but controlled by the Federal Reserve. That would be, I think, more of a complicated way to approach it. It would be a lot easier just to nationalize all the banks. But again, the government is more worried about optics than efficiency. So if they were to simply say that we are going to, allow you to continue to bank with your current bank, it will still be owned and operated by the shareholders, local, whatever. But the currency that's in that bank, which would be your central bank digital currency, will be wholly owned and facilitated by the Federal Reserve Bank. So this would give the guise of local ownership, but in reality, everything would be owned centrally. And this is the kind of slippery slope that, a lot of libertarian podcasts talk about. Once you give up a little bit, it's only a matter of time before you're forced to give up more. And so, especially for, a lot of my friends on the left who are, staunch Democrats, it's funny to have those conversations with, especially when it comes to free speech, because, that's been a typical Democratic platform is free speech. And, you have that, try to have that conversation with them as saying, well, if you just start controlling speech, where does that end? And it is amazing the faith in government that so many Americans have. It's just mind blowing. And this is going to really push that envelope. And I think that they're going to need a pretty big crash. Potentially it could be a dollar crash, could be a market crash, but they need to install a lot of fear and anxiety in the public to introduce a central bank digital currency. And so, again, look for the signs because, from my perspective, it's inevitable.
Definitely isn't alone in creating a CBDC. They've been fully launched in 11 countries already. And according to the Atlantic Council's tracker, 112 nations around the world are at some stage of implementing a CBDC, including Australia, India, Canada, and Brazil, nations that account for more than 95% of the world's total GDP. In other words, a CBDC will be coming your way very, very soon. But there has to be some sort of an upside to CBDCs, right? Well, according to your government, there absolutely is. And it seems that they're all reading from the same script, because no matter where you look, it seems that they are saying the same thing. Rishi Sunak is the new Prime Minister of the UK, but in his previous role as Finance Minister, he said CBDCs would be a safe and secure form of new money, and one that would foster inclusion. The US Federal Reserve says a CBDC would be the safest form of money available and offer an improvement on safety when compared to the current monetary system. The
You can kind of see some of these keywords, inclusion, diversity. They're going to use a lot of woke language to again test the waters with this kind of stuff. And especially, I mean, whether it's the woke stuff or the climate agenda things, I mean, these are all going to be used as justification for CBDCs. And so when you hear those keywords, especially when it comes to finance, you need to understand why they're being mentioned and the context they're being talked about in. So again, these are going to be things that I think are going to become more and more prevalent as you know as things continue. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the inevitable collapse of the U.S. economy and all, when the shit hits the fan. I think that's when you're going to hear and see more of these keywords thrown around when it comes to finance.
National Monetary Fund also says CBDCs would be more secure than traditional money and offer more safety due to not being as volatile as currently available cryptocurrencies. And the World Economic Forum believes that CBDCs will help promote financial inclusion around the world, as well as providing more safety and security by cutting down on financial crime. But the thing is, not everyone is so optimistic about CBDCs, with an article by Forbes summing up many people's concerns in a single headline, stating very simply, central bank digital currencies are about control. In a moment, I'm going to cover off a few more hypothetical scenarios of how a CBDC could be used as a tool for control. But first, I want to know what you think. Do you think that CBDCs are a great thing for safety, security, and inclusion, or do you have other views? Let me know down below. A CBDC would allow your government to track almost everything you do, what you buy, when you buy it, and who who you buy it from. But as reported by the New Yorker, chances are your government is already spying on you in this way, with at least 45 nations, including Germany, Poland, and the US, possibly illegally collecting data on their citizens today. This is why I am already taking steps to protect my data online, and I'm doing this by using NordVPN, the sponsor.
All right, we're going to skip the NordVPN sponsorship, and I myself use a VPN. I'm not going to give any plugs, but there's always concern even with VPNs as far as how much the government is already tapped into their servers. And in some respects, it might actually make it easier for your government to spy on you using a VPN. And, I went with, a VPN service that was reasonable, financially reasonable. It would be great, if anybody listening or watching this who's done some deep dives on VPNs and their security and their ability to protect privacy. I mean, if you've done that research and that deep dive, we'd love to hear about it from you. So whether you post a comment or send an email our way, we'd greatly appreciate it, because I think it could be a tool for protection, but at the same time, it could also be used against all of us. So just be careful when it comes to VPN, and let's continue.
Has 30 days money back guarantee, so you can try it risk free. So sign up now to get 4 months free access by going to nordvpn.com/Sorel. There is a link in the description. Now, before I continue, I also just quickly want to say that we are making some really big changes to this channel very soon. And if you want to be the first to know, we are going to be sharing that in the newsletter first. There are 75,000 people plus on that newsletter. So there's a link in the description for you to sign up for that. Now let's go back.
I've noticed a lot, Tom Woods, there's a lot of podcasters out there that do provide newsletters. I'd be interested for, those of you who are regular listeners, what your thoughts are of a newsletter. I know personally I get inundated with emails, and so I'm very anti-newsletters. It's just another email in your inbox. But if there is interest in that, or if there's interest on, instead of a newsletter that's pushed to you, having a blog on the We Love the State website with that kind of context, let me know, whether it's post a comment, send us an email. We would love and appreciate the feedback. Let's continue.
Back to CBDCs and why so many people seem to be concerned about CBDCs. And as the Forbes article states, the main concern is about control. A CBDC would give your government a level of power it's never had in history. And the most worrying part isn't necessarily that they would have access to all your financial data. It comes from the fact that a CBDC would be programmable, like the rules of a video game. Your government could program your money and the way it can be used. For example, it could be programmed so that you could only spend it on certain government-approved items, or completely block you from purchasing some others. For example, again,
I think I just pulled a "you're on mute," which happens to me, unfortunately, on a regular basis at work. Anyhow, just to interject, this is kind of the tie-in to global warming and all of that stuff. It would be very easy for your government to say, we are seeing a spike in global warming, or whatever it is, and so they're going to say, we're going to eliminate the ability to purchase red meat for the next week. And so you would go to the store, or maybe they would just say, we're going to reduce your ability to purchase red meat to one purchase every 24 hours. So whether you're going to McDonald's or you're going to a local grocery store, you would not be able, you could purchase beef to a certain extent, and then you would go to purchase it again, and you would get a pop-up on your phone that says you've reached your weekly allowance of red meat. Thank you for being a good citizen and supporting our goals for reducing climate change. So again, especially for those on the left, maybe they would endorse this. The problem is all of a sudden, they eliminate red meat altogether and say cannot no longer be purchased, and maybe then all of a sudden, no longer can you buy chicken. And it's funny and it's ironic that it's not funny, but in some respects, there's a lot of people that used to be looked at as fringe or conspiracy theorists, and that were like, all right, the globalists are going to make us eat bugs and yada yada yada, and it's like, oh, you just blew them off. But I think like the Netherlands, a lot of areas right now, I mean, they're like shutting down farms, and not just a farm here and there. I mean, mass amount of farms. I mean, there are protests that you're not going to see at the news. I mean, you have to actually go and look for these protests. And there are government agencies, even, some of these protests are with tractors and stuff like that. They're going in with forklifts and picking these tractors up and like tipping them over to get them off the road. It's crazy because this is the kind of stuff that, I've listened to Jordan Peterson talk about when it comes to looking at the Soviet Union, looking at Nazi Germany, and some of these regimes, and you're like, how in the world could somebody turn on somebody else? So, for example, but at the same time, I mean, we saw this during the COVID lockdowns. I mean, these were police officers that were shutting down businesses and arresting people who were trying to stay open during the pandemic. And the whole I was just doing my job is such a acceptable excuse. And you look at the Nuremberg trials, and that excuse was thrown out the window. Like, there is no just doing my job. Like, you have to, that this is wrong, and yet you still did it. And here in America, we've already crossed that bridge. We've already accepted that the police officers were just doing their job. And, what happens next? So especially those who are out there in positions of authority, I'm sorry, but don't hide behind I'm just doing my job. And the Back the Blue initiative is like, it's scary because the police, the FBI, those are all just an arm of the federal government. And if you don't keep them in check, they're going to abuse their position and authority. And we're seeing it on a daily basis. And CBDCs are going to be the next arm in control, because if you don't even have control or power over your own money and the production of your labor or the results of your labor, then to you, like, what really do you own? It is 1984. It is totalitarianism. I mean, it is fascism that Adolf Hitler wouldn't have been able to dream of. And we are on the brink of full government control. It is scary beyond belief, and it's not enough just to resist. We also need to start looking at ways of how do we circumvent this control.
only items your government deems to be essential. With a CBDC, they could also directly control how much of your money you spend, hypothetically limiting you so you could only spend a certain amount of money each day, or on the other hand, forcing you to spend all of it by a certain time period. And if you didn't, your money would just vanish from your account. At first glance, some of these ideas might sound a little far-fetched. Like, you might be asking yourself the question, why would the government want to stop you, block you from buying certain things, and why would they want your money to expire? Well, here it's important to understand the reasons behind these possibilities and how these actions could become a reality when CBDCs enter our lives. Let's say your country's economy is struggling or stagnating. Your government could stimulate the economy by forcing citizens to go out and spend their money. This would be very easily possible with a programmable CBDC. First, your government could set your savings to expire within 30 days. Now, obviously, most people wouldn't want their money to just vanish, so instead would go out and spend it, causing money to flow through the economy. In other words, the exact outcome your government wants, enabling them to engineer the behavior of citizens. Another very plausible way a CBDC could be used to control the way you use money is by controlling your carbon output. We all know our world has become obsessed with carbon emissions, and very soon most of us will have a personal carbon limit enforced upon us, something already being tested or talked about in many nations on Earth. As a CBDC would give your government access to your entire purchase history, they could also calculate your carbon usage, and if you go over your monthly limit, they could force you to stop creating more. For example, by using a CBDC to block you from buying gas for your car or a plane ticket, they could even cancel your ability to buy so-called high-carbon food items like meat, coffee, or rice. But instead of stopping you from buying these items, they could just fine you for producing extra CO2. And because they hold your money already, these fines could just automatically be removed from your account. These are just two examples of the powers a CBDC would give your government because of
It's scary, and at the same time, this is like knocking on our door as far as it could be our reality very soon. And again, it could be championed by the majority of Americans. That, I think, is what is really scary. Is it's not just the fact that, you know, our government is going to deceive us and manipulate us into something like this out of fear, but there are going to be a lot of Americans, especially the younger generation, who are going to champion this. And I think that's so what, when we talk about kind of that, the Mises revolution in the Libertarian Party, it speaks to a lot of the younger generation who are willing and able to push back. And ironically enough, that used to be that was kind of the expectation of growing up, right? High school and college was, you were supposed to rebel. You were supposed to push back against authority. You were supposed to, you know, champion the underdog, and it's been so distorted to the point where it has been reversed. And that's what I think scares me more than anything, is these are dangerous things that are coming. And I think especially the next generation, or even the current generation, are going to be applauding their introduction. And, is not because I'm a nerd, and, looking at especially the Star Wars prequels, I was never a big fan, but the idea of this is how liberty dies, with applause. And we are seeing that in the United States. And it is ironic that George Lucas saw this, I mean, decades ago, and now we're living through it. It's scary, and it's inevitable, which is unfortunate. because of that's what the majority of Americans want, and that is the danger of democracy. We were warned about the danger of democracy, and yet we're applauding it and we're celebrating it now. And that's just, it is what it is. But again, there are going to be ways that we can circumvent it.
Of the programmable nature of this money. There are a lot more examples I could talk about on how a CBDC could be used to control a population, but before I go, there's only one that I really want to cover. One of the biggest concerns around CBDC is how they could be used to control free expression of people. In China, where a version of a CBDC is already active, people's social credit scores are linked to their bank accounts. And if they say the wrong things online, for example, in criticizing the government, their rights to use money goes away. For example, being limited from buying plane or train tickets, or even from buying certain kinds of goods. This is something the Chinese government has already enforced upon upwards of 23 million of its people. But most of us don't live in China. We live in societies that are considered much more open, liberal, and free. But how long will things stay that way? Just a few days ago, the Swedish government voted to make it illegal for journalists to criticize the government. In Australia, freedom of expression is already not protected by the constitution, and new proposed laws would allow government ministers to sue people critical of them. And in Canada, Justin Trudeau has already stopped mostly peaceful protesters from accessing their own money. This is why many people fear the implementation of a CBDC, because
I think I was just talking again while I was muted, but that's what happens when you have a great idea and you just jump right into the conversation without actually checking to see if you muted yourself. Anyhow, what I was saying was people don't understand and they don't know history enough. Here's a something that you can do just for the fun of it, if this could be considered fun. Google what is fascism. It's amazing how much fascism has just been tied to Nazism, and therefore it's all about race. And what fascism is not anything to do with that. That's Nazism. That's a very different political structure. Yes, Hitler did use fascism as kind of a base for, how the government operates. But, funny enough, he was more capitalistic in his approach to fascism than how most governments in the world today approach how their government runs. So, from my understanding and from my reading, and I think this is pretty well accepted, is fascism is the joining of political structures and corporate structures to shape the economy. So for example, in a socialist society, a communistic society, all means production is owned by the state. Funny enough, most countries are scared to death of that system because it eliminates profits for the corporations. And, from a libertarian perspective, we are, pure freedom and in personal freedom, especially having everybody work for the state is abhorrent, right? But in a fascist society where you have a partnership between corporations and government, you can own your property, you can own your business, technically speaking, but the government, through regulation, dictates everything you can and cannot do with your property or your business. And most of those regulations are actually created by corporate entities to prevent competition. And that is literally the pure form of fascism, is a government and a very small but large corporate control that dictates what people can and cannot do with their own quote unquote property. And China has really been the kind of gold standard, has become the gold standard for fascism. And it's amazing how many politicians have been caught saying they wish they could implement China's model. I know Trudeau has been caught on basically saying that much for Canada, and clearly his actions are proving that fact. But most governments around the world look at China's model as being like the gold standard that they want to achieve, and that is fascism. We are all at some point or another in a degree of fascism already. We talk about the United States. The regulatory requirements for businesses, or even for what you can and can't do on your own property, is so fascistic that even, again, Hitler, Mussolini, they could have only dreamed of what our governments have achieved. So it's so important to a lot of times people will blame, oh, it's capitalism that's at fault. And like the first thing to push back against that is we left capitalism a long time ago. Capitalism is, I have a brick and you have a dollar. You value the brick more than my dollar, and I value your dollar more than my brick. And so we agree to exchange the two without any external pressure or manipulation. That's capitalism. And people don't. Capitalism has been vilified to such a degree that it's a gross misinterpretation of what capitalism actually is and what fascism is as well. And so again, I would love, at some point we'd love to have kind of a historian on the podcast to talk about how some of these governments like Mussolini, how they structured their governments to align with fascism ideology, and then we can kind of compare and contrast how most nation states are structured and how they function today. Because I can guarantee you they're all, to some degree or another, fascistic.
Government has a history of wanting power over people, and a CBDC would give them ultimate power over our actions, the ultimate power to take away your money, the very thing we need to survive, allowing them to engineer the actions, speech, and even thoughts of a population. Now that you've heard all this, do you agree with the Forbes article title that says that CBDCs are about control? Let me know down below. And there's also a second part of that article headline that I didn't read before. And the headline is, central bank digital currencies are about control and they should be stopped. So, can we stop them? Like it or not, CBDCs are basically everywhere, but we can vote against them. Firstly, by voting out politicians who support CBDCs, and secondly, by voting with our wallets and choosing not to use them once they're implemented. Without us using them, it will be impossible for them to succeed. So if you do fear that a CBDC is just going to give your government more power, remember this: without us, they have no power. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in for our 100th video. And remember to sign up to our newsletter to get that first info on what is happening to the future of this channel. And if you enjoy this video, you might also enjoy the other video we did on CBDCs. It is linked on your screen right now. Thank you so much for watching.
So definitely check out Sorel and her channel. Something that I would really also look or suggest that you look at is um, goldbacks. We did have an episode on goldbacks already. Um, it's it's something that I am a big proponent of. It's it's decentralized, it's off the grid, and it is something that we can use to actually circumvent a central bank digital currency, especially at state level. Thankfully, the United States does have it in our Constitution that gold and silver are legal tender, and I think that is something that we can try to use to our advantage, especially when it comes to goldbacks and other currencies. Again, currencies that are tied to gold and silver, because they're written in stone for how we how we view and how we appreciate what money actually is. So thank you for accompanying me on this solo journey. If you want to follow us, please check out welovethestate.com. We have a great Facebook group, so look us up on We Love the State on Facebook. You can also follow us on We Love the State on Instagram. And thank you again for all of your support. It means the world, and any and all feedback that you can provide, we would love it. So whether it's comments or send us an email, you can email us at welovethestate@gmail.com, or comment on our video. The comments definitely feed the system to say that this is valuable. At some point, we would love to get to the point where, especially whether, unfortunately or fortunately, if we get a big enough following on YouTube, we'll probably get some strikes as we talk about, topics that are not allowed. And so we will most likely, kind of move over to other platforms. But while we're on YouTube, please feel free to like our videos and subscribe, leave comments, and we would really appreciate that feedback. So until next time, thank you again, and long live the state.